Slip space was math. It was not a place. It had no light, no mass, no geometry that translated into anything a human body could orient to. What it had? Roland's sensor arrays processed them continuously from inside Infinity's bridge core. Transit vectors, drive harmonics, fluctuation tolerances. The Forerunner-derived engine at the ship's stern pushed through those numbers the way a blade pushes through a seam, and the seam was exactly where the calculations said it would be. Then, it wasn't. The anomaly registered at 0311 hours ship time. Not a Covenant disruption signature, not flood interference, not any deviation Roland had a classification for. What registered instead was a shear force. Immediate, not a gradual drift. A correction, like something on the far side of the tunnel had decided the equation needed different terms. The ship lurched. Deck plating rang. In crew quarters across 17 decks, 17,151 people who had not been gripping something became 17,151 people on the floor. Equipment not properly secured went with them. The Forerunner drive shed its energy load in a burst of subspace harmonics, and the tunnel collapsed. And the UNSC Infinity dropped into normal space at 0311.7 hours, the stars ahead shifting as the ship's inertial systems adjusted. Roland spoke before any other voice reached the bridge. New stellar coordinates. No match in any UNSC database. No FLEET-COM transponder signals on any band. No human interstellar beacons, no Covenant communication architecture. No Forerunner, navigational data. A pause of 0.4 seconds, which for a smart AI was a long time. I cannot identify our location. On Infinity's bridge, Master Chief Petty Officer John 117 was already at the tactical display. He had been at the tactical display for the last 6 hours of transit. He hadn't needed the handhold bars during the lurch, the MJO Elna armor compensating before his inner ear finished registering the movement, its servo systems redistributing his full mass without waiting to be told. He looked at the star field on the forward screens. He looked at Roland's navigational overlay, which showed a clean absence where reference points should have been. He looked at the star field again. "Different galaxy," he said. His voice was the same whether he was calling in air support or acknowledging a casualty count. Slip space anomaly, consistent with Forerunner drive irregularities documented after the Didact incident. Roland, calculate return window probability, 8.7% within a 12-month window. That assumes the anomaly is bidirectional. I cannot confirm that assumption. 8.7%. John had worked in worse margins. He filed it under working conditions. "Get me a weapons readiness report," he said. The Arven system opened on their sensors like a problem someone else had recently failed to solve. A gas giant, rust-red and enormous, held 4 moons in stable orbit. The innermost moon was green. Dense jungle cover, breathable atmosphere, 1 active settlement in the northern highlands. Around it, spreading outward across the gravity well, in a slow, expanding ring, a debris field so dense that Roland's classification system cycled before settling on the correct answer. Wreckage. The radiation signature was residual, catastrophic directed energy discharge, 7 standard days prior. Something enormous had died here, something built, not formed, and destroyed at a scale that still hadn't finished dispersing. 2 active factions were operating in the system. Small, fast craft, 12 of them, roughly 15 meters each by sensor profile, running in tight tactical formations with exhaust signatures that matched nothing in the UNSC recognition library. Farther out, a single larger vessel, approximately 1.6 kilometers of angular gray steel, triangular cross-section, gun emplacements along the dorsal surface, currently moving toward the system's edge at reduced power. The larger vessel was retreating. Infinity, for context, was 5.7 kilometers long. She had materialized from the spatial rupture like something that had no business existing in this system. 5.7 kilometers of dark gray titanium alloy and ceramic composite armor. 4 Mach arrays along her upper hull, each larger than the retreating vessel's secondary battery banks. The rupture sealed behind her. Neither faction had a name for what they were reading. The 12 small craft broke from their approach pattern and held position at a careful distance. The retreating vessel adjusted heading, not toward the new arrival, but away and faster. John could read the arithmetic from here. Something that size, appearing from a spatial anomaly, no transponder signal, no identification. You did not engage without orders. You corrected course, and you filed a report. Roland's tactical summary appeared in his HUD. We are observing a battle's aftermath. Both factions have detected us. Recommend minimal profile until we understand whose battle it was. Full complement. All 4 primary Mach arrays loaded and nominal. Secondary Mach network ready. Full missile complement at capacity. Point defense grid is hot. HAVOK warheads secured in Magazine 7. He was still watching the larger ship when it rotated to bring its weapons online. The turbolaser volley was not a warning shot. Red-orange plasma bolts crossed the distance in under a second, sustained, aimed a full firing solution from an Imperial gunnery crew, following standard doctrine. An unknown vessel emerging from a spatial anomaly was a threat. You don't wait. Infinity's point defense grid responded in 0.6 seconds. The M965 Fortress autocannons on the forward hull traversed and opened fire, working through the incoming spread in systematic 3-round bursts, killing 6 bolts in 2.1 seconds. The energy that reached the armor plate scattered across the titanium composite as thermal residue. No damage alert, no casualties. Roland, they shot first. Permission to respond. John, hold. 1 warning. He selected the Mark 2551 secondary battery, not the main gun. The main gun was designed for targets that needed to stop being ships. 1 secondary Mach, reduced charge, locked on the larger vessel's starboard midships, not the bridge, not the engines. The middle, where by standard warship design crew density was lowest. The targeting lock took 1.4 seconds. The round took less than 1 second to travel. 3,000 metric tons of ferric tungsten, accelerated to a fraction of light speed, entered the vessel's starboard hull, and exited the other side in a straight line. 2 compartments vented to vacuum along the transit path. The ship listed slightly, its structural systems compensating. It did not break apart. It stopped shooting. The silence that followed had weight. The 12 small craft held their positions, targeting, sensors, cooling, formations. Every reading Infinity was collecting from the Avon system went still at once. In that stillness, something was being understood by every pilot and crew member, and person with a sensor display in the system who had just watched a vessel 3.5 times the length of the largest warship in the sky stop a Star Destroyer with what read as a secondary battery. John filed the engagement record with Roland. No UNSC casualties, no significant hull damage. Warning delivered. Hostile response terminated. His armor was operational, his shields were nominal, his weapons were loaded. He didn't look at the interface housing on his left wrist, where a different voice had once lived. His AI slot was empty. Okay, real quick, because I have to know before this story gets moving. Comment below and tell me who you're watching this for. The rebellion staring at a ship bigger than anything they've ever had on their side. The Empire about to have a very bad few weeks. Or the Chief looking at 9% odds on going home and deciding that's enough to work with. Drop it below. I read every single one. The signal came through on a frequency Infinity had no natural decoder for. It took Roland 6.3 seconds to match the band, longer than he preferred, but the compression architecture was unlike anything in UNSC or Covenant records. He was reverse engineering it from the signal shape itself, while the connection was still active. What came through when he found it was not military command traffic, not a weapons lock handshake, not anything he could classify by origin. It was a voice, a woman's voice, transmitted from the lead fighter in the circling formation. Precise and exhausted and unbroken, the kind of voice that had been carrying something very heavy for a long time and had decided that setting it down was not an option. To the vessel that just demonstrated the ability to punch through an Imperial warship with a single shot, she said, "Who are you, and whose side are you on?" Roland flagged the incoming contact and opened the response channel. John 117 crossed the bridge in 6 steps and keyed the visual feed on. Whatever the woman had been expecting to see, it was not this. 7 feet, 2 inches of MJOLNR Mark VI filled the transmission frame, green and grey plate over a frame that made the doorway behind him look proportionate and everything else in the feed look small. A visor that reflected the bridge lighting back at the camera and revealed nothing, not a face, not an expression, not a species she could cross-reference against any Alliance intelligence file. From the cockpit of a 15-meter fighter, she was looking at a war machine that had answered a communications hail in a calm human voice. The Spartan looked at her the way he looked at everything, as data. Asta. "Master Chief Petty Officer John 117, he said, "United Nations Space Command. We entered your space by accident. We don't know this galaxy. We're not on anyone's side." A pause. "You just disabled an Imperial warship," she said. "They fired first. That's policy, not a side." Another pause, shorter. She was running calculations. "I'm going to need you to hold your position," she said. "I'm going to need a moment." The feed stayed open. John stayed where he was. He did not move. From the rebel command post on Yavin 4's surface, Han Solo watched the same visual feed on a secondary display and said what he said whenever he encountered something he couldn't immediately categorize. "It's a trap." Leia, standing 2 meters away at her own console, did not look up. He punched through an ISD and then stopped firing. "That's exactly what I mean." Han leaned against the console frame the way he leaned against everything, with the practiced ease of a man who wanted to make clear he was present by choice. "Why stop? You have a ship that size, that firepower, and you fire once and hold. What are you waiting for?" He looked at the armored figure that hadn't moved since the channel opened. "He's waiting for something. He's waiting for us to talk to him," Leia said. "That's my point." She looked up then. "He had that Star Destroyer in a targeting solution the moment we came into range. He didn't fire until they did. Then he fired once." She looked back at the feed. "That's not what you do when you're waiting for an opening. That's what you do when you've already decided not to take one." Han had no answer for this. He filed the argument in the category he filed. Most arguments he lost. Tabled for now. Leia keyed the channel back open. The armored figure on Infinity's bridge had not shifted position in the 40 seconds since she'd asked it to wait. "One question," she said. "Before anything else. Will you listen before you shoot at anything else?" "Hey," John 117 said, "I'm listening now." She had spent the last 40 seconds thinking about what she'd watched. A ship 3.5 times the length of any vessel the Alliance had ever fielded, emerging from a spatial anomaly with no warning, fired on by an Imperial crew, and the response had been calibrated. The Star Destroyer was damaged, not destroyed. Its crew was still alive. Restraint cost something. In her experience, restraint cost more than firepower, because anyone with enough firepower could shoot. It took a different kind of discipline to stop. She had met people with that discipline before. They were rare and they were valuable and they were almost always very dangerous. "I'm inviting a representative to the surface," she said. "Your ship holds position. You come down without weapons drawn." "We talk." "Understood," John said. "I'll need 4 personnel." "Fine. Armed?" She looked at Han, who spread his hands in an expression that meant, obviously armed. "What were you expecting?" She looked back at the feed. "Fine," she said. The damaged Star Destroyer reached the edge of the Yavin system, at reduced power venting atmosphere from 2 compartments that had been sealed and abandoned within minutes of the hull breach. Its emergency report traveled faster than the ship itself, compressed and encoded and relayed through the Imperial beacon network. It arrived at the command vessel of Lord Vader 12 hours after the Infinity had dropped into normal space. Vader read it standing at a console in his private quarters. The report was precise. Unknown vessel, length approximately 5.7 standard kilometers, emerged from spatial anomaly consistent with no known drive technology in Imperial records. Fired once on the attacking vessel, did not fire again, did not pursue. He read it twice. He did not respond to the ISD captain. He keyed his personal cipher and forwarded the file to Coruscant without comment, without notation, without the kind of addendum a lesser officer would have attached to demonstrate his own analysis. He had an analysis. The Pelican descended through Yavin 4's upper atmosphere. 40 minutes later, a blocky troop transport with running lights on and weapon systems visibly cold. Roland had confirmed the configuration over comms before departure because Leia had asked and because it cost nothing to show. John sat in the crew compartment with 4 Marines who were watching the jungle moon come up enormous and green in the descent windows. He was watching the sensors. The atmosphere read as nitrogen-oxygen, breathable by the suit's analysis. Temperature at 31 degrees Celsius. At landing altitude, humidity at 93%. Flora signatures, unlike any planet in the UNSC catalog, different photosynthetic wavelengths, different structural densities, alive in a way that didn't match any ecological database aboard Infinity. He kept his helmet on. The Pelican touched down in a clearing the rebels had flagged on approach, a stretch of packed red earth at the base of what LiDAR read as an ancient stone structure, massive and old, the kind of old that meant centuries at minimum. A delegation waited at the tree line. Personnel in mismatched field gear, sourced from wherever it could be sourced, the uniform of a resistance rather than a regular army. Practical, outnumbered, still here. He stepped off the ramp. The jungle hit him all at once, heat and noise and the smell of something green and wet, with something underneath it, something the stone and the soil had been keeping for a long time before any of these people arrived. His audio filters catalogued sounds that had no entries in any database. His environmental sensors logged compounds the suit had no names for. Everything was unfamiliar. Everything was data. Leia Organa stood at the front of the delegation. She was shorter than the comms feed had suggested. She held herself the way certain commanders hold themselves, not with visible tension, but with a stillness that was its own kind of weight. The kind that had learned to look like calm because calm was more useful than the alternative. Her eyes moved across him quickly, reading the armor, the dimensions, the weapon systems, the visor that gave her nothing back. She had been reading rooms her entire life. John registered, not because it was easy, because stopping was not a viable option. "You're larger than the feed suggested," she said. "Standard lens," John said. She held his gaze, or the approximation of it, for another moment. Then, "Welcome to Yavin 4, Master Chief. Let's see what we can figure out." The jungle noise filled the space between them. Above the tree line, past the upper atmosphere, the infinity-held orbit, dark and patient, the largest thing in the sky by a significant margin. In the system beyond, the damaged Star Destroyer. For now, nothing else was coming. The briefing room had a table built for humans, and John 117 was not using it. He stood at the far end, which was effectively the end of the room, because 7 feet 2 inches of MJO Elna at standing height changed the geometry of a space. The chairs were Rebel issue, designed for the range of bodies the Alliance pulled from across a dozen systems, and none of them had been built for him. He did not appear bothered by this. Leia sat across the table. Luke was to her left. Han stood to one side with his arms crossed. Admiral Akbar sat nearest the door, his large amber eyes moving between the chief and his own tactical readout, running assessments in parallel. John 117 gave a debrief that lasted 9 minutes. He did not editorialize. He did not claim they deserved his trust or that he deserved theirs. He stated the Human Covenant War, 27 years, hundreds of colony worlds, the Forerunner ring installations designed to exterminate all life in the galaxy as a measure against a parasite that consumed everything it touched, and the Didact, whose attempt to convert the human population of Earth into digital soldiers was stopped by one Spartan fireteam in 2557. He stated the slip space anomaly. He stated Roland's return window probability. He stated where they were, which was somewhere they had no maps for, and what they intended to do about it, which was, "Wait, what does the UNSC want from us?" Leia said. "Not hostile operational, a way home, while we wait for one, a reason to be useful." She held his gaze, or the approximation of it through the visor, for a moment. It was the most direct answer she had heard from anyone in a negotiation in a long time. Luke, seated to her left, was not entirely present in the room. He was listening, his responses to direct questions appropriate and prompt. But some part of him had gone elsewhere the moment the armored figure settled at the end of the table. He was doing something that was new enough to him that he hadn't named it properly yet. He was reaching. The Force was in the room the way it was in every room, in every living thing. Leia's signature was warm and quiet, the kind that came from something deep and mostly untouched, banked like coals. Han's was loud, static, chaotic, and bright, which Han would have found offensive, and which was accurate. Admiral Akbar carried the Force the way most people did, a hum beneath the surface, present without urgency. Not silence. Silence would have been a presence in itself, the way a sealed room felt different from an open one. This was something else. The Force was active everywhere around the Chief, in everyone near him, flowing through the ordinary channels of the living world. It simply did not include him. He was not a gap in the Force, so much as a specific shape of absence, edges that implied a volume, the way you could know the dimensions of something missing by looking at everything around it. Luke had never felt this before. He filed it the way he filed, things he didn't have a framework for, carefully, without judgment, knowing he would need it later. The probe droid had done its job. It had run passive scans of the Yavin system for weeks before the Infinity arrived, a quiet Imperial asset mapping the debris field and Rebel signal signatures. When it detected the spatial rupture, it transmitted a compressed data burst to the nearest relay before a Rebel patrol fighter destroyed it. The burst was 9 seconds long and contained everything the droid had seen in the 40 seconds between the Infinity's arrival and its own destruction. That was enough. A senior intelligence officer aboard a Star Destroyer at the system's edge read the burst and made a decision he was authorized to make without referral. 16 Imperial commandos and 1 additional asset, a Force-sensitive operative assigned to Imperial intelligence, not a Sith Lord. A dark side agent of a practical variety, who had proven useful in situations requiring the ability to sense through walls. They landed on Yavin 4's far side on a cold-running shuttle and moved toward the base perimeter through 3 kilometers of dense jungle. Infinity's orbital sensor array flagged the movement at 21:47 hours. Not the Rebellion's equipment which was working the right frequencies, but the wrong resolution. Infinity's sensors were calibrated for Covenant stealth insertion across a dozen planet types. John's HUD populated with 16 contact markers and 1 question-marked contact, an individual moving differently from the others, hanging back. He told the 4 Marines to hold the perimeter. He went into the jungle alone. The commandos were professionals. Suppressed gear, good spacing, correct jungle movement for a night insertion. What they had not accounted for was the motion tracker, 60 meters of passive threat detection in every direction, mapping their positions against the tree cover before any of them were within visual range. What they also had not accounted for was what 60 miles per hour in MJOLL&DIA looked like in dense vegetation, which was not 60 miles per hour in practice but was still faster than anything that Large had any right to move. 41 seconds, 3-round bursts from the MA5D, working from the flanks inward, motion tracker, cover, reposition, fire. The commandos never coordinated a response to a threat they could not locate. They went down in sequence. John stepped into the small clearing at the rear of the formation and found the operative. The operative read the force around the incoming threat and found nothing, not a gap, not a silence, nothing which was different from both. The Force-sensitive mind hit the absence like a step off a ledge in the dark. Combat instinct fired before. Conscious processing could explain why the operative threw a force push at the shape coming through the tree line. Over 700 kilograms of MJULNIR armor and Spartan physiology left the ground, traveled 15 meters, and went through 2 trees before the forest floor stopped it. The operative waited, nothing not made of durasteel. Got up from a push at that magnitude. John got up, the HUD red shields at 38%, structural integrity across all systems, green. He ran a quick weapon check while the shield emitters recharged, moved laterally through the undergrowth without returning to the same axis the push had come from, and selected the M6 Grindel Galilean nonlinear rifle. The operative threw a second push in the direction the armored shape had been. John was not there. He had moved while the operative was drawing on the force for the follow-up, predicting the timing from the first shot's rhythm the way you predicted a weapon system's reload cycle. He came through the jungle from the left, 40 degrees off the operative's facing, and fired the Spartan laser at center mass. The operative deflected the core beam, which any trained force user with reaction time would do against a visible line of directed energy. What the operative did not deflect was the thermal bleed off the partial redirect, heat energy, partially redirected, partially absorbed by the armor plating on the operative's left side, not a lightsaber deflect. Not a force-based dissipation. Just heat. The armor blistered, the skin beneath it burned, the operative staggered. The MA-5D burst was already in the air. 3 rounds into the gap, the thermal bleed had opened. The operative went down in the roots and did not get up again, alive, and John knelt and took the comms device from the operative's belt. He logged the frequencies and filed the data with Roland. He was not out of breath. At the base, 4 rebel scouts who had tracked the engagement in partial view through the jungle canopy filed their report simultaneously. Leia read it and put it on the room display without commentary. The room went quiet. Luke, to Han in a voice that was still processing what it was saying. He got hit by something that should have killed him, and then he went back in. Han Solo looked at the sensor log for a long time. He did not say it was a trap. Admiral Akbar reviewed the full engagement record, methodical, replaying the key contacts twice. When he finished, he closed the file and asked, with the deliberate evenness of a fleet commander who had learned not to broadcast conclusions before they were complete, "What is the durability rating of that armor?" No one answered. No one in the room knew. He opened a new file and wrote 4 lines. Unknown. Resistant to force-based kinetic impact at combat magnitude. Resistant to directed energy. Continued operational after engagement with Imperial force-sensitive agent. Then, a 5th, recommend classification. Extreme threat or extreme asset, pending further information. He did not write which one he thought it was. He suspected it was both. The report reached Vader at 0318 hours, forwarded from the damaged ISD by encrypted military channel. He read it standing at the viewport of his command ship, the star field beyond the transparasteel holding no particular interest. The Yavin system was 3 light hours away. He had chosen not to be closer. 1 vessel, unknown origin, hull length 5.7, standard kilometers. No registry, no matching drive signature in Imperial records. Single secondary gun discharge disabled 1 Imperial-class Star Destroyer. 1 shot. A ground insertion team dispatched. 16 commandos, 1 Imperial force-sensitive operative. The operative engaged the vessel's ground element. 1 soldier, no force signature. The operative was defeated. The soldier sustained a direct force push at combat magnitude and continued operational. Vader read that last line again. No force signature. He had fought Jedi who had learned to suppress their presence in the Force, a technique that produced a muted signal, a dim light rather than an absence. What the operative had encountered was different. The report used the word wrongness, which was imprecise language that Vader had never heard from a trained dark side agent before now. You cannot anticipate what you cannot sense. In 38 years of combat across hundreds of engagements against human and alien opponents and force-sensitive enemies who had matched him in technique, if not in power, that advantage had been constant. The Force did not lie about the presence of living things. This soldier had no presence. He filed the report to the Emperor and began composing an operational order. Darth Sidious appeared on the holographic projector 6 hours later, robed, ancient, perfectly still. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He listened to Vader's summary with the attentiveness of someone who had already read everything Vader was about to say and was listening for the spaces between the words. When Vader finished, the Emperor said, "Bring me this soldier, Lord Vader, alive." Ideally, a pause that had a specific shape, but the vessel. Sidious's voice carried the quality of a collector who had just learned a thing he had long considered theoretical was real. The vessel I want intact. It was not the response Vader had expected. He had presented a military threat and received an acquisitions order. He recalibrated. A ship 5.7 kilometers long, incorporating drive technology no Imperial engineer had encountered, capable of disabling an ISD with a single secondary discharge. Sidious had looked at that data and seen a prize rather than an enemy. He had looked at a soldier with no force signature and seen an instrument rather than a body alive, Vader confirmed. Ideally, Sidious repeated, with a patience that meant, I have given you the priority order. Do not mistake the qualifier for flexibility. The channel closed. Vader began composing deployment orders. 2 Imperial-class Star Destroyers jumped into the Yavin system 19 hours after the Infinity's arrival. They emerged from hyperspace in tight formation, 1.6 kilometers each, combined weapons batteries, designed for sustained engagement at range. Behind them, following at a different interval, came a third vessel, wider and lower than a warship, bristling with projector arrays that had nothing to do with weapons. Roland identified the configuration before the Interdictor-class cruiser had fully cleared its hyperspace exit. Sir, that vessel has gravity. Well, projectors if it activates them. Slipspace access will be disrupted. A pause of 0.2 seconds. The projector warm-up sequence may already be affecting the local slipspace geometry. Can we jump before it activates? No. Already in range. The trap was closed. The operational plan was transparent. Hold a target in system, close to turbolaser range, overwhelm armor and point defense through sustained fire, capture what survived. The first Star Destroyer opened with a full broadside. Infinity's point defense caught 70% of the incoming bolts, the autocannons cycling through their engagement sequence in the rhythm of a system calibrated against Covenant plasma, and finding turbolaser fire slightly slower, slightly more predictable. The remaining 30% struck the hull. Not critical damage, not without cost. 4 outer deck sections breached, emergency seals engaging, crew already moving. Damage alerts queuing in Roland's system by priority. Roland locked the primary MAC on the first ISD's forward section. A 3,000 metric ton ferric tungsten slug, accelerated to 25% of light speed by a CRO-8 Series 8 electromagnetic accelerator, generating approximately 8 teratons of kinetic energy, crossed the distance before the ISD's fire control could register the charge signature. The round caught the Star Destroyer's forward command tower. It did not stop there. It continued through the forward section on a straight line, venting the bridge, the forward fire control, and 2 decks beneath it. The Star Destroyer lost navigation, weapons, and primary targeting in 1 second. It began drifting. 1 shot. 1 ISD. Mission killed. The second Star Destroyer pulled to maximum turbolaser range, where the targeting solution on Infinity remained favorable, and the return fire was harder to intercept across the wider spread. More bolts, more hull strikes. The exchange at extended range favored the ship with more guns, and the Empire had more guns. Sustained fire at this geometry would find the gaps eventually. John, close the distance. 037. Full military power. A 5.7-kilometer warship closing at maximum thrust on a 1.6-kilometer Star Destroyer changed the engagement geometry in one specific way. The turbolaser batteries of an ISD could not depress far enough to track a target that large once separation dropped below effective range. Designed for ship-to-ship engagement at distance, not for a vessel that had overrun the shooting solution and was now occupying the same tactical space. Infinity drove through the ISD's defensive envelope, point defense managing the close-range fire, and at 200 meters of separation, fired the secondary MAC network toward the interdictor. 2 Mark 2551 rounds, targeted specifically on the gravity projector arrays which Roland had mapped from the interdictor's emission signature during the approach. The projectors came apart, the gravity well collapsed, slip space was accessible again. 11 minutes had elapsed. Both Imperial Star Destroyers were combat ineffective. The interdictor was venting atmosphere from 3 forward sections, damage visible on optical sensors at this range. Infinity held position in the debris of the exchange, hull breaches sealed, repair teams working. 3 broadsword aerospace fighters destroyed with their pilots during the close approach. John, Roland, casualties. 97 injured, 14 critical, a number. Not large by the scale of the wars he had fought in, not small by any other measure. He absorbed it the way he absorbed all mission costs, completely, fully, without moving, knowing each name would be read aloud at the proper time, and that the reading would take however long it took. Hold position. Begin repair prioritization. Aboard his command vessel, Lord Vader received the after-action report from the interdictor captain. 2 IS, combat ineffective. 1 interdictor badly damaged. 11 minutes from engagement, start to cessation of hostilities. 1 vessel, unknown origin, sustained operational throughout. He pulled the sensor footage and reviewed it without commentary, watching the tactical geometry. A ship that had not retreated when outgunned at range, that had closed distance to negate the range advantage, and that had then targeted specifically and only the system that controlled the engagement's terms. Not the nearest threat, not the largest threat, the component that made running impossible. It was not how the Empire fought, not doctrine, not Jedi reflex, not anything he had encountered in 3 decades of conflict. He did not send the Emperor a comment, he began planning personally. Vader did not send another fleet. He had reviewed the engagement footage 9 more times since the after-action report, watching the geometry of the unknown vessel's tactical decisions with the attention he gave to things that deserved to be understood before they were destroyed. The footage told him what firepower at range could accomplish, not enough. The vessel absorbed sustained turbolaser fire better than anything in the Imperial Navy. The obvious tool was not the correct tool. The correct tool was him. His boarding party was 2 squads of elite commandos and himself. The shuttle approached from the blind angle created by Infinity's own hull mass, a gap in the autocannon coverage that Roland had not yet reconfigured because Roland did not yet know there was a gap. The shuttle attached a docking collar to Infinity's secondary hangar hull at 340 hours. The collar burned through the outer plate in 80 seconds. Vader stepped through the breach first. UNSC corridors were lower than he expected. Not low enough to inconvenience him, but built closer to practical human necessity than to the architecture of power that Imperial warships maintained. Utilitarian conduit, metal plate, emergency lighting. The interior smelled of recycled air and machine oil and something else the suit identified as Forerunner material composites. There were Marines. Properly deployed, holding corridors in 3-man fire teams, using the ship's geometry as cover, falling back to defensive positions when the commando's advantage made a given junction untenable, drawing the advance towards sealed blast doors they controlled from behind. They were professional. Not good enough. The commandos were better, and Vader was not comparable to either, but they held the outer corridors for 4 minutes before the advance reached the interior sections. Vader killed the minimum number he needed to in order to advance. He was not here for casualties. He was here for information. A Marine at the T-junction, where the secondary hangar's access corridor met the engineering, Spine stepped into the corridor to cover the retreat of 2 colleagues, and Vader reached and closed his hand. The force choke lifted the Marine off the deck. Vader held him there and rounded the corner and found the soldier. The soldier was not at the command center. 3 MA 5D bursts, full auto. 9 rounds at Vader's torso in the time it took to identify the target, aim, and fire, which was approximately half a second. Vader brought the lightsaber up. The blade caught all 9, deflecting each into the corridor walls in bright lines of thermal scatter. The Marine in the force choke went down when Vader's attention shifted. He assessed 7 feet 2 inches of powered armor, already moving laterally. Not back. The lightsaber cut at the Spartan's right shoulder. The Spartan was not there. It had used the door frame as cover, changing the blade's angle of attack, and was now firing again from the new position, aimed at Vader's legs, specifically at the joint between the lower suit and the mobility system housing, a choice that required prior study of Imperial armor specifications, not luck. The shots came in below the lightsaber's natural defensive angle. Vader redirected them telekinetically. The rounds hit the ceiling conduit and detonated. The Spartan's shields caught the debris. Then Vader stopped calculating and threw. 450 kilograms of powered armor traveled the length of the corridor on a full force throw, not at arm's length, at distance, and hit the wall with enough force to leave an impression in the metal plate. The Spartan hit the deck. Vader waited. He reached into the force, expecting the physiological spike that every living thing emitted when it believed it was about to die. Elevated heart rate, adrenaline, pain, the signal of animal survival pressure that the force transmitted like a scream, even from beings with no sensitivity. He felt nothing, not because the Spartan was not in pain. The impact had been sufficient to register on his own suit's external sensors at this distance. Pain was data, not information that changed the mission. The Spartan got to its feet in 2.1 seconds. Vader said, "You are no Jedi." The Spartan said, "Number A pause that was not empty." A pause in which 2 soldiers who had spent their adult lives learning to read opponents read each other, and found that the reading produced the same result from both directions, something that went all the way down, armor over armor, no soft layer beneath. Vader filed this. The Spartan had been moving during the pause, not away, sideways, toward a position it had designated before the engagement started. A weapons cache, a second weapon, larger, mounted to the shoulder. The M6 Grindel Galilean nonlinear rifle. Vader had never encountered the designation. He recognized the energy output from the discharge signature, a directed energy weapon at a power level above any handheld Imperial system. He brought the lightsaber into defensive alignment as the beam fired, tracking center mass, preparing to redirect. The core beam he redirected. The thermal bleed off the partial deflection, heat energy spreading outward from the redirect point, diffuse radiation that a single point deflect could not collect and dismiss. He did not redirect. It struck the exterior plating of his suit across the left chest and shoulder. The instruments inside registered the temperature spike. The life support system fluctuated for 0.8 seconds before stabilizing. Not a killing blow. Vader had not failed to see an attack coming. Not in years, not since a moment, on a moon that he did not permit himself to think about. The soldier had aimed for the thermal bleed rather than the beam, which meant it had understood, before firing, that the beam could be deflected. That was not a conclusion arrived at by observation during the fight. The soldier had studied him before boarding. He ordered the party back to the shuttle. The commandos withdrew without question. This was reconnaissance, and it was complete. The soldier's tactical profile, its weapons, its response patterns, he had what he came for. He walked back through the corridor. He did not run. He was not afraid. He was assembling information, and the information was producing a picture he found increasingly worth the personal attention. At the T-junction, the Spartan held position with the nonlinear rifle raised and watched him go. The shuttle detached from the docking collar at 0421 hours. Infinity's breach teams sealed the hull. John stood in the corridor among dead Marines and dead Imperial troopers and the structural damage of an exchange that had lasted less than 12 minutes, and he performed a weapons check and filed the casualty report with Roland, and remained still in the corridor for a moment after. He had not won, he had not been destroyed. The opponent had walked away rather than pressed an advantage, which meant the opponent had goals that were not accomplished by destroying him. That information was worth the bruises. Far away in the still quarters of his own command ship, Darth Sidious sat with his eyes closed. He had followed the engagement through his connection to Vader. Not the fight itself, which was not available to him in the Force, but Vader's physiological responses to it, the readings that traveled through a Sith Master's awareness of his apprentice. He had felt Vader's recognition. He had felt Vader's interest sharpening to a point. He had felt the moment where Vader reached for the Force around the opponent and found nothing. He could not see the soldier directly. The Force blank extended even to this. Indirect observation through borrowed senses, second-hand perception through a connected mind. The soldier was simply not present in any direction he approached. But in the gap where the soldier should have been, Sidious found something else. A shape, not of the soldier, but of the soldier's absence. A slot with specific dimensions, as if something had lived there once, something the soldier had carried close, and its loss had not healed, but had instead calcified into a form the Force could almost read. He did not know what it was. He began his research. The jungle at night was not quiet. John stood at the perimeter's edge, where the cleared ground gave way to root systems 3 meters across, listening to the night's continuous noise through his audio filters. Calls from something with lungs, vibrations from something without, the wet settling of vegetation that had grown in this humidity for centuries before any human arrived. His HUD ran in the background, mapping contacts, updating threat radii, pulling the tactical file on the corridor, fight that Roland had tagged for review. He had been reviewing the geometry for 90 minutes. The lightsaber deflect at 0.43 seconds was faster than reflex. That was the Force precognition component. The telekinetic redirect of the leg shots had changed the direction of kinetic energy without a visible mechanism. The throw, 450 kilograms at full weight, had required no physical contact. These were 3 components he had no reliable counter for except distance and speed, and the corridor geometry had eliminated distance. He was still working on it when the motion tracker logged an arrival at 22 meters. He did not turn. The contact was alone, unhurried, not running a flanking approach, not tactical. He let the tracker map the figure against his recognition database. Young male, late teens to early 20s, standard rebel field clothing, 1 weapon, Luke Skywalker. The same person who had sat at the briefing room table watching him, with the focused quiet of someone doing something with his mind that was not listening. Luke sat down on a root beside him. The jungle closed around them both. "I've been trying to understand what you are," Luke said. "Soldier," John said. "UNSC Navy, Spartan 2 in the Force." Luke looked at the darkness ahead, not at the visor. "I've been trying to understand what you are in the Force." The chief did not answer immediately. He reviewed the deflect data one more time and closed the file. "What does it tell you?" he said. "That's the problem." Luke turned a small piece of bark over in his hands, not nervous, just giving them something to do. Usually, I can feel a person through the Force the way I can feel something in the dark. Not see it. There's a shape where you should be, an outline. An absence with edges, John said. Yes, exactly. John filed this against what the operative on Yavin had done, the pause before the second Force push, the instinctive reaction to something registering as wrongness rather than threat. The Force responded to him the way a sensor system responded to a stealth object. It couldn't find him, but it could see the space he displaced. Explain the Force to me, he said. Luke looked sideways at him. Then he accepted the question as operational rather than philosophical, which it was, and he started with what Obi-Wan had told him. The energy field, the living things, the way it connected everything. John listened without interrupting. He took in the data, tested it against observable phenomena, stored what held and flagged what needed review. When Luke finished, John said, "How far can you sense things? Planetary scale? Maybe further. I don't fully know yet." "Does it work through walls?" "Yes." "In vacuum?" Luke considered this. "Yes, I think so." "The Force isn't atmosphere." "Then it's a sensor system," John said. The thing he was about to say was true and also not complete, which was not a position he was equipped to argue out of. "It's a sensor system," he said, "and it's also something else that doesn't have the right word yet." "I know what you mean," John said. "Some things don't have the right words yet." The jungle filled the pause. Something called from the far side of the clearing. Something answered further in, from a different species with a different range. "What did it feel like?" Luke said. "Fighting him." John considered whether to answer. He generally did not answer questions about what things felt like. What things felt like was not operationally useful. "Efficient," he said. He moves like a problem with a predictable internal logic. Assesses, repositions, applies force at the correct point. The unpredictable part is the mechanism. The Force, Luke said, the part that moves things without touching them. Every other component of his movement, I can map and plan against. The Force component requires a different approach because I can't track it the way I track a weapon. He paused. "I'm working on the approach." "He's the most dangerous thing in this galaxy," Luke said. For most people, he let the qualifier stand. The Spartan pulled up a new file on his HUD and then closed it without reviewing it. "You got up," Luke said, "after the throw." "That's policy," John said. Luke was quiet for a moment. Then, without planning it, John could tell from the rhythm, the slight front weight on the first word that meant it had come out ahead of the decision to say it. "You lost someone." The chief did not move. His hand tracker ran a passive sweep. Contact profile unchanged. Not tactical. Not aggression. Something else, something that had come from a training Luke had not fully completed, reading the space around a person the way you read a depression in the ground where water had sat. "An AI," John said. "She was in here." He touched the side of his helmet. He considered what he had been going to say next. The word had been close and wrong, which was why he had stopped. Oriented was accurate. "She kept me oriented." Luke looked at the helmet, at the place he would have looked if he could see a face. What was her name? Cortana. The word occupied the space between them, the way weight occupies a surface. John had not said it to anyone since the debrief. He had written it in reports, in casualty documentation, in the formal notation of after-action analysis. He had not said it out loud to a person who would understand what it meant. He did not know why he had said it now. Luke looked at the route he was sitting on. He had lost Obi-Wan 9 days before the Infinity arrived, had felt the presence vanish in the Force like a fire going out, had been told by the same presence, from somewhere he couldn't see, that it was not finished. He was still not completely certain he believed that. He started to say something about it. He got 3 words in, and something in the Spartan's stillness stopped him. Not hostility, a different kind of wall. The particular stillness of someone who had decided at some level below language not to be met in that place, not because they didn't feel the thing being offered. Because accepting it would require acknowledging that the loss was something that could be addressed, and acknowledging that would cost something he was not prepared to spend. "I know what that's like," Luke said. "Holding on to them after they're gone." John looked at the tree line. Then, "I'm not holding on to anything. I'm completing the mission." She helped me start. The jungle filled the silence. Luke let it sit. He filed the answer the same way he'd filed the Force explanation. Without judgment, but not without weight. Something was happening with this person, something that was going to matter. He could not see it clearly. He could only sense the shape of it, the way you sensed something massive through fog. The comm in John's helmet activated. Roland's voice, flat and immediate. "Sir! 3 Star Destroyer signatures entering the outer system." They're not moving on intercept vectors. They're positioning. John stood. He was already walking. Luke watched the armored shape move into the darkness between the trees until the jungle absorbed him, 30 meters out, then 40, then nothing. He sat on the root for a moment in the noise of the night. The Force had brought this thing here. He didn't know why. He thought the why was going to become clear before this was finished. He got up and followed. The Imperial Task Force entered the system in formation. 5 Imperial-class Star Destroyers, each 1.6 kilometers of gray triangular steel, moved in a spread that covered the Yavin system's approach vectors, the way a hand covers a surface. Behind them, at calculated distance, a replacement interdictor with gravity projector arrays already warming, and the damaged survivor of the first engagement running in formation as a signal that the Empire did not abandon its ships. The combined broadside complement of 5 Star Destroyers exceeded anything Infinity had faced. Roland calculated engagement outcomes at every range band in the time it took the fleet to clear its hyperspace emergence, and completed the analysis before the Imperial Admiral's hail arrived. The hail was not a demand. To the unknown vessel and the rebel installation on Yavin 4, "Stand down, or the moon burns. You have 10 minutes to transmit compliance." Leia took the channel from Roland. Her voice did not flinch, not from surprise, which she had planned for, and not from fear, which was different from not feeling it. She looked at John, who was reading the fleet formation geometry on the sensor display. 300 people are in that base, she said. "How long to evacuate?" John said. 12 hours minimum, the transport capacity. Then we hold for 12 hours. He turned back to the display. That was the full scope of the discussion. "Roland, at range, 5 Star Destroyer broadsides exceed our point defense intercept rate by approximately 32%. Sustained engagement at extended range means hull damage we cannot absorb. What's the geometry at close range?" Turbolaser batteries on an Imperial class cannot depress below 4 degrees at close separation. Inside 200 meters, their firing solution on us is severely degraded. Their solution on the moon's surface is also degraded. They cannot target what is directly below a ship they are fighting. "Plot an intercept through the formation's center," John said. "We close to contact range before they can distribute fire." Roland put the course on the main display. It went directly through the middle of 5 Star Destroyers. "Confirmed," Roland said. "Infinity moved." The Imperial Admiral had prepared for many responses: a retreat, a negotiation, a show of firepower at range designed to buy time. What registered on his sensor display was a vessel 5.7 kilometers long, accelerating into his formation's center, and he had approximately 4 seconds to revise his tactical thinking before the engagement was already happening. MAF fire from the primary battery hit the lead Star Destroyer. The 3,000 metric ton slug, at 25% light speed, crossed the distance while the ISD's gunnery crews were still assigning targeting priorities. It entered the lead ship's starboard bow and exited the port stern, venting the bridge superstructure and fire control across 4 decks. The Star Destroyer went dark. 1 second later, the secondary MAC network locked on the formation's right flank ship and fired in pairs 2 rounds, sequential discharge at 1.3-second intervals. The second ISD's engine section took both impacts and lost primary propulsion. It began drifting, weapons still functional, navigation gone. 2 Star Destroyers out of the fight in the opening exchange. The 2 that could still maneuver burned hard on intercept, bringing their broadsides to bear before Infinity could reach the protection of close range. Turbolaser fire came in sustained waves. The point defense grid worked through the incoming spread at the rhythm it was designed for, but the rhythm was overwhelmed at the edges. Bolts found the hull. The first major hit opened a 60-meter section of Deck 1-4. Emergency bulkheads sealed in 1.1 seconds. An Archer missile pod on the port ventral surface took a turbolaser bolt directly into the magazine. Not through the outer armor. The bolt burned through the plate and detonated inside the assembly. The explosion was contained. Infinity's designers had understood that contained was better than catastrophic and had built separation between magazines accordingly. 40 meters of corridor ceased to exist. The personnel in those 40 meters had no warning. Roland shifted power routing around the loss and kept the weapons systems online. Engine nacelle 3 took a sustained hit from the second maneuvering ISD at close range. The bolt burned into the drive housing. 30% of the port rear thrust output was gone. Infinity's straight-line speed dropped. Her turning radius increased. John, use the asymmetric thrust. Spin us to starboard. I want a firing solution on the 5th ship. The 5th Star Destroyer had not joined the formation charge. It had held at range targeting the moon's surface. This was doctrine. While the engagement occupied the unknown vessel, the bombardment could proceed regardless of the outcome, a reasonable plan. Roland applied 100% thrust to the starboard nacelles and cut the damaged port side to 0. The imbalance used the physics the same way a boat uses a paddle, not a maneuver any ship this size was built to perform, but one the structure permitted if you were willing to strain the mounts. Infinity swung to starboard under the asymmetric load. The 5th Star Destroyer's targeting solution on the base locked. Roland, sir, bombardment in 40 seconds. The CRO 8 Series 8 primary MAC required 11 seconds to reach firing potential at full charge. John had ordered the charge at the start of the turn. The round fired the moment Infinity's gun bore crossed the 5th Star Destroyer's forward section. The 5th Star Destroyer's forward section. Forward fire control, targeting computer array, bombardment, cannon charge assembly, the 4 compartments. Directly behind those compartments was not present when the countdown reached 0. The bombardment that would have sterilized 40 square kilometers of Yavin 4's northern jungle did not fire. The 300 people in the base heard nothing. On the orbital sensor display they were still there. Akbar launched the rebel fleet from the moon's far side, What had survived the Battle of Yavin a week prior was not much. Fighters, corvettes, nothing that would last a direct exchange with a Star Destroyer. Akbar did not send them to fight the ISDs, he sent them to divide attention. Harassment fire from 2 angles required 2 targeting solutions. 2 targeting solutions halved the fire on Infinity. With the pressure split, the 2 remaining functional Imperial ships were in a sustained engagement they were slowly losing. Both withdrew from the system at 12:47 hours. Not destroyed. They left. John stood on the bridge of a ship with hull breaches on 8 decks, an engine running at 70%, point defense ammunition at 44%, and a sensor display showing the rebel base intact on the moon below. Roland casualties. The number arrived in the same flat tone Roland used for everything, because Roland had learned that tone was a kind of mercy in these moments. 340 dead, 612 injured, 14 critical, 3 broadsword pilots, 2 Pelican crews. A pause of 0.2 seconds. Engine nacelle 3 at 40% pending repair. Hull integrity 68%. Magazine 7 sealed. Total loss. John received this without moving. He stood for 5 seconds looking at the sensor display. The base was still there. The moon was still there. 12 hours had been the estimate, and it had not been 12 hours, and the 300 people had not needed to evacuate. Record all names, he said. Already have, Roland said. Good. He did not say anything else. There was not anything else that fit. Aboard his retreating command vessel, the senior Imperial Admiral composed his after-action report. He was a careful man. He used precise words. He had served in the Imperial Navy for 22 years and filed hundreds of engagement reports, and he could not remember struggling to find language for a tactical situation before now. He wrote, "The vessel's tactical behavior is not consistent with any known force in the galaxy. It does not retreat when outgunned. It closes. It targets the component that controls the engagement's terms first. The gravity projector, the bombardment array, the piece that would make retreat or rescue impossible. Then it targets whatever is firing at the thing it is protecting." He stopped. He read what he had written. He added one more line, which was not standard Imperial after-action language, and which he included because it was the most accurate thing in the report. It is protecting things. Not territory, not assets, things. He transmitted it to Lord Vader and waited. 2 weeks passed. The Yavin system held its breath. No new Imperial fleet had entered. Both sides were assessing the kind of pause that was not peace, but looked like it from a distance, while what actually occupied the silence was calculation on both ends of the equation. Infinity's repair teams worked in rotating shifts. Engine nacelle 3 was restored to 60% capacity, which was not good, but was functional. Hull breaches on 8 decks were patched. The crew's dead had been recorded by name in the order they fell, and Roland had locked the list in primary memory rather than archival storage. The list stayed accessible. John ran combat exercises at 0600 every morning in the cleared ground at the jungle's edge. 15 rebel soldiers had asked to train alongside him. Not to replicate what he did. They understood they could not. But watching him move had taught them things no rebel handbook contained. The geometry of cover at different weapon ranges, the timing of a 3-point position transition under fire, what it looked like when threat prioritization had become instinct rather than decision. They came back every morning. He did not encourage them and he did not discourage them. The signal arrived at 11:43 hours. It came in on Infinity's bridge frequency, encrypted with an Imperial military cipher. Roland cracked the cipher in 11 seconds, ran source authentication in the next 2, and flagged the channel on the main display. John opened the channel. A face appeared on the main bridge screen. Pale, deeply lined, ancient, smiling with the specific patience of something that had time on its side and knew it. A face that had spent a very long time learning how to look like whatever a viewer needed it to look like, and had become so practiced at the skill that it had its own smoothness, not the smoothness of kindness, but of something engineered. "I believe," the man said, "that we may have been approaching each other from entirely the wrong direction." His voice was measured, warm, in the precise way that very cold things can present warmth, military channels, fleet engagements, the language of confrontation. When what this really is, I think, is two parties who have not yet found the frame for a different kind of conversation. He did not introduce himself as the Emperor. He said, "I am a man who finds rare things worth understanding, and you, petty officer, are extremely rare." John ran his assessment, age indeterminate, older than appearance suggested. Robed, no weapon visible. Body language, still, precise, nothing wasted. Voice calibrated. Not a voice that had lost its edge to age, a voice that had decided exactly which edges to show. He waited. "I understand," the man said, "that you have lost something. An intelligence. A companion of long years. A pause, precise in its length. Cortana." John did not move. The armor did not flinch, because armor does not flinch. The visor showed nothing. His posture did not shift. At no observable level did he react to the word. Roland, reading the chief's biometrics through the suit's medical feeds in real time, registered a 14% spike in cardiovascular output. A 3-second lag before the next voluntary movement, a single sharp variation in respiration that normalized within 4 seconds. Roland did not say anything. He logged it. The question that formed before. He could stop it. How does he know? The answer John would not get from this channel. An Imperial intelligence analyst, reviewing data captured during the Yavin foreground engagement weeks earlier, had recovered fragments of a UNSC debriefing log. The name appeared 3 times. The analyst flagged it. The Emperor received the flag and did what he had done for 30 years. Assembled the picture from the pieces, reading the topology of a person's losses the way an engineer reads a structural diagram. The hole in the force, where something was missing, had confirmed the weight of it. "The force," the man said unhurried, with the ease of someone explaining something for their own enjoyment rather than the listener's benefit, "is not something you have experienced before. I understand that. But I have studied it for 8 decades, and I have learned, this is something very few people learn, that the Force allows for things that those without it believe impossible." His hands, folded in his lap, did not move. Patterns of thought, geometries of mind. The specific architecture of an intelligence, what your civilization calls an AI, is in the end a pattern. A long pause. Patterns, under the right conditions, can be preserved. Another pause, shorter, can be found again. He did not say he would do it. He said the galaxy was large enough to contain that possibility. He said it the way a cartographer marks an unknown region, not a promise of what was there, just a direction hope could run in if it decided to. The silence that followed was John's to fill. "What do you want in exchange?" he said. "Nothing you haven't given 100 times." The ancient face did not change service. "Your skills in service of order, in service of stability across a galaxy that has been destabilized, you may have noticed, by the same people who are currently hosting you. A beat, perfectly timed, You have served an organization that takes children and turns them into weapons, petty officer. You already know what service costs. I'm simply offering you something in return for a change." He closed the channel before John could respond. The display went dark. Roland waited 12 seconds. Then, "Sir, the channel is closed from the originating end. I can attempt to trace the transmission origin." "No," John said. He stood at the tactical display for a moment. Then he left the bridge. The observation bay was on deck 7, a space with no operational function, a viewport in the hull, an open deck, built because someone in the UNSC's ship design division had believed that 17,000 people on a military vessel deserved one room. It was rarely used. John stood in it for 40 minutes, looking at the Yavin system through the viewport. Roland monitored his biometrics through the suit's passive feeds. He did not speak. The armor did not show what was happening inside it. That was the armor's function. John was working through the offer the way he worked through a targeting problem. Looking for the lie. There was always a lie. The question was not whether the man was lying, that was established, but where exactly the lie was located and what it was protecting. The man knew Cortana's name. That was intelligence work, not force sense. He had not claimed she was alive. He had made a claim about patterns, unprovable in both directions, which made it both useless and impossible to dismiss. He had offered nothing concrete and left a direction open. This was not aimed at John's reasoning. It was aimed at something below reasoning. John had been hit in that place before. He knew what it felt like. He did not know if knowing made it easier to hold. He heard footsteps on the deck behind him and did not turn. The motion tracker had her profile at 9 meters. She stopped near him and looked at the same viewport and said nothing for a long time. "Whatever he offered you," Leia said. She did not ask what it was. She was too careful a strategist for that. She had read Roland's channel log. She knew an Imperial signal had come through on the bridge frequency, and John had taken it alone, and she had given him 40 minutes, because 40 minutes was the right amount of time. Long enough for someone who was going to fall. Short enough to catch someone who wasn't. "I don't know what it was," she said. "But I know how he builds things." She looked at the stars outside the viewport. "He built Alderaan's destruction out of my cooperation, my presence in the right place. My compliance with a process I thought I was resisting." Her voice was even, which was what it always was, and which had cost something to make it that. "He takes something you love. He shows you the shape of it, and then he uses the shape to take everything else." She was not making an argument. She was telling him what happened to her planet, what it had cost. That was the most honest form of warning she had, and she offered it without asking for anything in return. John looked at the stars for another moment. He didn't get a yes, he said. "I know," Leia said. "That's why I came now instead of earlier." Outside the viewport, the Yavin system held its breath and kept holding it, past the debris of 2 fleet engagements, in directions neither of them could see from here. Something was assembling. Both of them could feel it in their different ways. Neither named it. Not yet. Vader had watched the corridor footage 11 times. He isolated 3 facts from the engagement record. The soldier prioritized shield integrity above every other tactical consideration. It moved laterally to preserve the shield rather than press an advantage. It never chose melee engagement when a ranged solution was available, even when the ranged solution was degraded. And when it selected a target, it targeted the specific vulnerability rather than the obvious one. It had aimed the directed energy weapon at the suit's thermal bleed, not the beam itself, and at Vader's arm rather than his center mass. These three facts produced one operational conclusion. The soldier would aim for the life support suit. The suit was the weakness. The soldier had already identified it. Close to melee range, before the soldier could achieve a clean ranged solution, force the fight into the space where the lightsaber was decisive and the directed energy weapon was a liability. At 3 meters, in a confined space, nothing worked against a lightsaber and a fully operational force connection. He adjusted the boarding plan. Smaller party, no large insertion window. Speed above all. John had also watched the footage. His conclusion differed. The lightsaber was a secondary threat. Any weapon with a visible emission path could be partially planned against, disrupted by angle and cover. The telekinesis was the primary problem. No barrel, no aim signature, no predictable geometry. You could not dodge it the way you dodged a weapon. You could only limit the conditions under which it operated effectively. The force operated through the user's nervous system and intent. The life support suit regulated that nervous system. That was the path. He gave the captured comms device from the Yavin ground engagement to Infinity's engineering team with one question. What is the electrical frequency range of Imperial life support systems? 48 hours later, they had a waveform profile. John adapted 3 EMP munitions from Infinity's research stores, not designed for this purpose, but adapted. He also chose the ground. He told Roland to construct an apparent security gap, a lightly defended corridor approach that looked like a genuine breach in Infinity's defensive grid. The corridor fed into Hangar Base 7, a large space with specific geometric properties, support struts, height clearance, multiple staging positions that John had spent 2 hours mapping on his HUD. His position was behind a support strut to the left of the bay's main entrance. He was already there when Vader arrived. The boarding party was smaller this time. Vader had learned from the first insertion. Minimal team, fast, committed to a single route. They followed the security gap Roland had arranged without recognizing it as constructed. Vader moved through the corridor with the precision John had catalogued from the footage. No wasted motion, every step covering maximum distance with minimum exposure. The dark figure entered Hangar Bay 7 and stopped. The space was large and dim. The support struts cast long shadows. Nothing moved. He extended his awareness across the volume of the bay. He found the gap. The specific, shaped absence, not silence, not a presence, but an outline defined by everything around it. He had expected it. Knowing what to expect did not make it easier to work with. He stood in the center of the space. "I know you're here, soldier," he said from 3 locations. Simultaneously, left, above, ahead. The voice was calm and immediate. "I know." The disorientation lasted less than a second. Vader passed it, pre-recorded audio looped through the bay's speaker system, while the actual position was elsewhere. He brought his lightsaber to readiness and turned left. 2 objects rolled across the deck from different angles, converging at his feet. They detonated without flash, without heat. Without any kinetic signature, the force could catch and redirect. A directed electromagnetic pulse, calibrated to a frequency range he had never encountered, hit every electrical system on his person simultaneously. The systems controlling his mechanical lungs stuttered. The interface connecting the suit's enhanced mobility to his neurological relays flickered. His breath caught in the mechanical way, the way it caught when the suit's regulation lost rhythm, a sensation he had not felt in years and did not allow himself to think about. For 4.7 seconds, Lord Vader was slower. Not slow. The precision of his movement and the depth of his force connection remained. But the relays that made the suit's enhanced capability an extension of his will rather than a constraint on it were operating at reduced capacity, and the gap between intent and execution was 4 times its normal width. John stepped from behind the support strut and fired the Spartan laser at Vader's saber arm. Not the blade, the arm itself, shoulder to elbow, at the point where the suit's external life support relays ran closest to the surface, at the intersection of the mechanical and neurological interface he had mapped from the corridor footage's detail frames. Vader got the saber up partway. He deflected the core beam on instinct, the same partial deflect he had managed 2 weeks ago. But a full-charge Spartan laser at 15 meters was not a corridor range exchange. The thermal and kinetic overpressure off the partial deflect hit the suit plating at the shoulder joint and traveled down the arm. The arm went numb, not severed, functionally impaired, while the suit worked to re-establish nerve signal integrity across a system struck at its most exposed point during an EMP disruption. The lightsaber dropped. John was already moving toward Vader, directly forward, with 450 kilograms of MJOLNIR air at full augmented stride. He had considered killing. He had run the downstream consequences and reached a conclusion before the engagement started. The rebellion had not authorized him to make that choice for them. Luke's reaction whenever Vader came up in conversation was not the reaction of someone who had closed that question. John was not here to resolve other people's open questions by removing the subject. He was here to hold the ship. So he drove. Vader fought with his offhand and the Force. The telekinesis still operated, the suit was recovering, but precision at 3 meters required different calibration than a throw across a corridor. John took a force push to the chest and absorbed it, 450 kilograms of mass and augmented muscle against the kinetic projection, and did not go down. He absorbed it and pressed forward. The Sith Lord was being pushed back, not by someone meeting him in the domain where he had always been dominant, by a soldier with mass and preparation and 48 hours of engineering time pressing steadily toward the hull breach. At the entrance to the boarding tube, Vader stopped. His life support had fully recovered. His saber was in his left hand. He stood at the edge of the breach and looked at the armored figure that had driven him here. John stood at the hangar's far end. Massachusetts 5D. Raised his shields were depleted. Nothing left in the emitters after 3 close-range force impacts. Across his left arm, a gap in the MJOLNIR showed where a glancing saber cut had found the seam during the press, not deep enough to stop him and not accidental. He was bleeding. He was standing. "You should have left when I told you to," John said. A pause in the dark hangar, long enough to count. "You carry something you won't name," Vader said. "I felt the weight of it." A pause. "I know that weight," John said. "Then you know how to carry it." Lord Vader stepped into the boarding tube. The hull breach sealed. John stood in the hangar. He performed a weapons check, registered the arm wound in his medical log, noted the shield status, and filed the engagement record with Roland, in sequence, in order of operational priority. The weight Vader had named was not in the filing system. He filed it anyway. Under, not yet. John initiated the contact. He composed the signal on the Emperor's frequency at 0800 hours and sent it before he allowed himself to think too much about it. He told Leia he was making contact. She asked if she should have the channel terminated. "I want a witness." He looked at Luke, who was standing at the back of the bridge. "You come here!" Luke crossed the deck. He did not ask why. He had learned in the weeks since the Infinity arrived that questions John didn't answer immediately were questions he had already answered before asking. Luke stood beside the armored figure and looked at the main display. Quote, "The hologram bloomed. Sidious appeared as though he had been waiting, unhurried, robed, smiling with the quality of something that had lived long enough that very little genuinely surprised it, and had learned to treat the things that did as additions to a collection rather than threats." His gaze moved to Luke and did not stop there. It registered him and passed on, settling on John, making clear that the young man in rebel field gear was background, not a participant. In the Force's terms, Luke Skywalker was one of the most significant beings alive, and Darth Sidious, who had known this for years, who had been engineering the fact of it, looked at him and looked past him without acknowledgement. Luke did not move, but his jaw set. "Petty officer," Sidious said you called. "This is encouraging." He abandoned the careful indirection of the previous conversation entirely. The phase for softening had passed. "I can reconstruct the pattern of your AI. The Force contains the architecture of all things that have existed within it." She was not Force-sensitive, I acknowledge that freely. But the Force does not respect walls between realities, and I have reached farther than you know. The echo of what you carried, the specific weight of what is absent, is readable even in the grief of a man the Force cannot directly see. A pause. "I can retrieve that shape, house it in a suitable vessel, and return to you what you lost. What I require is your service, your capabilities directed as I direct them, for a period to be negotiated." Luke said, "He's lying." He had not meant to say it that loudly. It was in the room now. Sidious looked at him then, just for a moment. The smile did not change. The young Jedi speaks of what he does not yet know. His attention returned to John. "Tell me, soldier, when you carried her in your armor, what were you protecting?" John said, "Humanity. And she was humanity to you." "A beat. So why is this different?" John took a long moment. He was working through it the way he worked through a targeting problem, looking at all angles, refusing to settle before the analysis was complete. Luke said quietly to John rather than to the hologram, "The dark side doesn't restore things, it consumes them. Whatever he gives you, it will cost more than what you lost." Sidious. Noble sentiment from someone who has never lost anything he couldn't get back. The observation was precise and completely without heat. "You still hear your old teacher's voice in the Force. You speak to him. You have not lost. You cannot speak to loss." John said, "He's right." Luke turned. "That part," John said, "about loss. He's right. That you don't know it yet." A pause. "But that's not the argument." Sidious let the space between them sit. He was not uncomfortable with silence. He had used silence as an instrument for decades, and knew how to make it work for him rather than against. He let it stretch until it had the quality of an open question. "Then tell me," Sidious said, "what is the argument? I would like to hear it from you." The bridge was quiet. Roland ran passive monitoring through the suit's medical feeds and said nothing. Luke looked at John and did not speak. John looked at the hologram for a long moment. Then he looked away from it, at the display, at the system overlay, the debris field, the moon, the ship's position, the way a person looks at something neutral when they are about to say something they have not said before. "You're offering me a copy," he said. "Not her, the pattern. A pattern is not a choice." His voice did not change. It held the same register. It held when he recited coordinates or filed a casualty report. Flat in a way that was not emptiness. What I'm missing isn't a data pattern. I have her data pattern. UNSC archives have everything she ever processed, every decision tree, every recorded output. A pause. What I'm missing is that she chose to be there. She could have transferred to any ship in the fleet. She stayed in my armor. That choice isn't in any archive. It isn't in the Force's record. You can reconstruct everything she did, and nothing of why she did it. Another pause. You're offering me a weapon and calling it a resurrection. Different universe. Same trick. The silence that followed had a different texture. Sidious was very still. Sentiment, he said. No, John said. Accuracy. He closed the channel. The hologram disappeared. The display returned to the system's sensor overlay, the debris field, the moon, infinity's position. Everything present in normal light. Luke stood at the display for a moment. Then, that was the hardest thing I've ever watched someone do. John looked at the display. It's the easiest kind of hard, the enemy you can see. There's a geometry, you plan for it. He turned from the display. The hard kind is the weight that isn't the enemy. It just sits there. Doesn't fight back, doesn't go anywhere. Luke, how do you keep carrying it? Same way I keep carrying the armor, John said. You just keep moving. Luke looked at the deck for a moment. The jungle moon was visible on the main sensor display, green and patient, the same as it had been when Infinity arrived. He had grown up on a desert planet, and the green still struck him as enormous and alive in a way he hadn't adjusted to. He thought about Obi-Wan, about what it was to carry a voice that had gone somewhere you couldn't follow. About how Obi-Wan's absence had a shape that the Force filled rather than left empty, the specific mercy that John 117 did not have, and would not get from the Force because the Force could not reach him. It was not useful to say, "I'll remember that," he said. "The armor line, John. It's not complicated." "No," Luke said. "It isn't. That's why it works." John left the bridge. On Coruscant, in a chamber with no light he had not chosen, Darth Sidious sat. He had offered logic and desire and the specific gravity of grief, and the soldier had found the exact location of the lie and named it, not in moral terms, not the Jedi's doctrine of attachment. The argument had been won on the basis of accuracy, and Sidious did not have a counter to accuracy, because accuracy was the domain he had always claimed as his own. He could not feel the soldier in the Force. He could not leverage what he could not see. He reached into the dark side's currents, looking for the longer angle, the slower play, the approach that would become available with patience if the soldier's position changed, or his grief deepened, or something new arrived. At the edge of his awareness at a distance he couldn't immediately locate, he found something he had not placed there, a wound in the fabric of space, old, not healing. On the far side of it, something was aware present in the Force, in a way that felt vast and patient, and not particularly interested in what Sidious wanted from it. He did not know what it was, he filed it, he did not share it. He began to think about patience, which had always been his best instrument, and which the soldier had just reminded him he was going to need. The channel stayed dark. The main hangar bay of the UNSC Infinity could hold 300 vehicles and still have room for formations. They used the room. All 16,811 surviving crew, who could be spared from essential posts, assembled on the hangar deck. Not ordered, invited, which, in the UNSC, was not a word the crew heard often, and which they understood correctly. The Spartan fire teams stood in a row at the front. Behind them, in order by department, in whatever they were wearing when Roland announced the assembly, Infinity's crew filled the deck in a silence that had actual weight. Leia Organa stood at the edge of the formation, slightly apart, not in uniform. She had come alone. Roland began reading at 0900 hours. He read each name in full, rank and surname and given name, in alphabetical order by surname, without inflection and without pause. He was an AI, and the steadiness of his voice was not a limitation of his design, it was a choice. He had thought about how to read these names since he locked the list in primary memory, and he had decided that steadiness was the most honest form of respect he had. He could give something a human voice could not, perfect consistency. Every name exactly equal to every other name, no hierarchy of grief. It took 47 minutes. John stood at attention for all 47 minutes. He did not move. The armor gave him no advantage in this. He was not holding himself still, because the suit did it for him. He was holding himself still, because the names deserved it. At minute 12, when Roland reached the seas, a junior technician 2 rows back sat down on the deck because her legs gave out. Nobody moved to help her, and nobody looked away from Roland's display. She sat there for the rest of the reading. That was correct, too. When Roland finished, the silence held for another 30 seconds. Then, one section at a time, the crew dispersed. They did not speak at first. Some were crying. Some were not. All of them were soldiers. And soldiers understand that grief is not something you perform, but something you carry, and the carrying starts now. Leia stayed. She found John at the edge of the hangar floor where the loading bay doors had been opened to let the jungle in, hot and green-smelling, alive in the way this moon was perpetually alive, everything growing, whether you wanted it to or not. He was looking at the tree line. She did not ease into what she had come to say. Your soldier program, she said. Halsey's program. They took children. She had done her research. Rebel intelligence had pulled UNSC records from Imperial data captured at Yavin 4, recovered from John's initial debriefing. She had read the documentation twice. 6 years old, she said. You were 6 years old. And you protect those people. The ones who took you. I protect humanity, he said. The people who took me are part of humanity. A pause. He was looking at the tree line, not at her. It was wrong, what they did. It made people who chose what they chose with it. He stopped, considered. That's a thin line. It's a very thin line, Leia said. She looked at the jungle. But you're on the right side of it. She had not expected him to. They stood at the open bay door for a moment longer in the green heat. Then John said, "Thank you for staying for the reading." "I counted," she said. 47 minutes. That's longer than most eulogies for kings. They were worth it, John said. She believed him completely. The crew vote was called at 1400 hours in the ship's command room. John presented the situation to Infinity's senior officers with the same tone he used for everything. Roland's current return window projection was below 9% for the next 12 months. The probability did not improve meaningfully in the 18-month window. They might be here for years. They might be here indefinitely. He laid out 2 options. Option 1, hold position, run defensive patrols, continue repair operations, wait. Option 2, commit to an active role in the rebellion's operations. Full capability deployment, the same mission they had always run, protecting people from a military force that destroyed what it couldn't control, different galaxy. He did not advocate for either option. He presented both. Then he called a vote. Unanimous for option 2. 30 seconds. He had expected this. He would have voted the same way. he addressed the full 16,811 surviving crew over Infinity's internal broadcast at 1600 hours. He did not give a speech. He gave an operational briefing. New theater of operations, indefinite duration, full commitment. He told them what they were protecting and why. He told them the cost they had already paid. He did not promise they would go home. He told them the mission was the same. The crew did not cheer. They nodded. They were UNSC military personnel, and nodding was what acknowledgement looked like. He looked at them for a moment. After the broadcast closed, rows of faces on screens across 16 decks, men and women, and the specific stillness of people who had already decided and were waiting for the word to make it official. He had given them the word. They had already been carrying it. Luke found him that evening at the observation viewport, the same deck, the same viewport, unfamiliar stars. The Rebellion's new base system had a different star field, and John had not learned the patterns yet. He was looking at them the way he looked at unfamiliar terrain on a HUD display, as data that needed more time before it resolved into something useful. Luke sat on the deck near him. He had gotten comfortable with silence near this person over the past weeks. He sat in it for a while before he said, "Do you think the Force brought you here?" "No," John said. "I think a slip-space anomaly brought me here. Maybe those are the same thing." John looked at the stars for a moment. "I'll leave that call to you, kid." Luke smiled slightly, which John did not see because John was looking at the stars. He said, "She would have liked it here, I think. All the new things to figure out." John did not respond for a long time. Long enough that Luke thought the conversation had ended, and he should probably go. Then, "Yeah," John said, "she would have." It was the most he had said about Cortana to anyone who wasn't asking him a direct operational question. Luke heard the weight of it. Not in the Force, where John was unreachable, but in the plain texture of the sentence. 2 syllables, and then nothing. It was enough. He left John at the viewport and walked back through Infinity's corridors, the metal and the light and the sound of 16,811 people living inside a vessel that was very far from where it had started. Han found John at the loading bay as the Pelicans were cycling for departure. John going up, Rebel personnel rotating through in the other direction, the operational handshake of 2 organizations figuring out how to share space. He looked at the chief for a long moment with the expression he wore when he was making a decision he hadn't planned to make. "You're either the most dangerous thing that's ever arrived in this galaxy," Han said, "or the most useful." John both, probably. Han stared at him. Then he nodded. Once, in the way scoundrels nod when they decide something is real. Not a performance, a conclusion. John walked up the ramp. The Pelican lifted. Below on the moon, the jungle grew regardless. Darth Sidious meditated in darkness. He had chosen darkness for these hours, not because the dark side required it, but because darkness required quiet, and quiet had grown scarcer as his empire expanded. In the still of his private chambers, no aids in the room's immediate radius, he could reach into the Force's darker currents without the noise of 10,000 subordinates cluttering the channel. He had been thinking about the soldier, not from wounded pride. That was not something he permitted himself. Pride was a weakness that masqueraded as strength, and he had identified it in himself decades ago and corrected for it. He was approaching the soldier as a tactical problem, a weapon he could not pick up, a lever he could find no purchase on. He had built the Cortana offer on 3 pillars: grief, need, and the surface reasonableness of the exchange. And the soldier had found the structural fault in the 3rd pillar and named it with such precision that Sidious had been left without a counter. Accuracy. The argument had been won in the domain he had always claimed as his own. Most people argued virtue. Virtue he knew how to address. This was new. He let the failure sit without resistance and reached deeper into the dark side's currents, looking for the long view, the slower approach. He had spent 8 decades learning that the most durable plans were the ones built on the most patience, and he had patience like he had everything else, in excess of what anyone expected. What he found at the edge of his extended awareness was not the long view. It was the scar. The slip space rupture had closed. Not entirely, not cleanly, but in every physical and technical register, it had closed. No sensor in either galaxy could find it. Not Imperial turbolaser tracking arrays, not Rebel long-range monitoring, not UNSC radar. But the Force recorded the shape of all things that had existed within it, and the wound the Infinity's arrival had torn in the fabric of space had not healed. Sidious reached his awareness to its edge with the caution of someone testing unknown ground. Something was aware back. He stopped. He reached again, more carefully. The something did not retreat. It was not the force blank that surrounded the soldier, that was an absence, a defined nothing the force could map by its edges. This was a presence, old in a way that made ancient feel like a fresh word, patient in a way that made Sidious's own patience feel like impatience. Not dark, not light, not force-sensitive in any configuration he had encountered. Something that predated the categories, something that had been watching the scar since it opened, that had known what came through before the scar finished forming. And now that he had reached his awareness to the scar's edge, it knew he was there. He withdrew. He sat in darkness for a long time. Then he catalogued what he had found. One anomaly, undefined nature, requiring patience and time. He did not send for Vader. He did not dispatch a fleet. He did not share it with anyone. He filed it in the part of his mind, reserved for things he had not yet learned how to use. And he committed to learning. He was not afraid. He did not permit fear, but he was, for the first time in a very long time, genuinely uncertain about something. He sat with that for a while longer than he had expected to. Uncertainty was a resource. You did not waste it by acting before you understood what you held. He had built an empire on the principle that knowledge preceded leverage, and this was knowledge of a new kind, the knowledge that there was something out there he had not yet categorized, that the scar the soldier brought was not only a wound but a door, and that something patient was already standing at it. He found, despite himself, that he found it interesting in a different part of a different galaxy. The UNSC Infinity held orbit above a moon. Her stellar cartography had no name, for the ship was quieter than it had been. 340 fewer voices. Sections sealed that had not been sealed before. Whole corridors that carried the specific silence of compartments cleaned and closed rather than inhabited. The warship had reconfigured itself around its new population the way a structure reconfigures around a missing load-bearing element. Not the same, but adapted. Roland managed the adjustment with the efficiency of a smart AI and the care of one who had been running this crew long enough to know which silences were routine and which ones were the kind you checked on. John stood at the observation viewport on Deck 7. He had been there for 23 minutes. The HUD was live, because the HUD was always live, but he was not reading it. He was looking at the star field, unfamiliar. Every constellation a pattern he had no name for, every star in every direction without a UNSC designation. He had traveled farther from home than anyone from his galaxy had ever traveled, and the word home was a concept that had always meant less to him than it meant to most people. Home had always been, the mission traveled with you. He thought about Cortana, not the offer, not the argument about patterns and choices. He thought about her specifically, the quality of her voice in his helmet when she was processing something at speed, the particular cadence of it when she had the answer before he had finished framing the question. She would give him the answer and wait 1 second for him to arrive at the same place. If he got there in under a second, she said nothing. If he took longer, she said something in an inflection that meant something different from the words. He had spent years learning to read the difference, and the difference was not in any archive. It was not something assembled from a pattern. It was something that had existed in a specific relationship between a specific intelligence and a specific person over years of proximity. And it was gone. He was looking at the stars when he thought about this. He did not look away. That was what carrying it looked like. Roland's voice came through the comm in the steady register that meant information rather than emergency. "Sir, the slip-space scar at the Yavin system's edge, I've been monitoring it as part of standard anomaly tracking. It's not closing. The closure rate has been negative for the past 72 hours. If I had to characterize the pattern, it's not decaying, it's stabilizing. A pause. I can't rule out the possibility that something is on the other side of it, something that's been there since we came through. I can't characterize the signature. It doesn't match any Covenant, UNSC Forerunner, or Flood pattern in our records." Another pause. "I thought you should know." John looked at the stars for a moment after Roland finished. How long to get back to the scar? "At current speed, 14 hours. Put it on the mission log." He turned from the viewport. He did not look at the stars again. He was already thinking about the mission, the scar, the 14 hours, whatever had stabilized on the other side of it in a galaxy that already had enough to deal with. There was a mission. There was always a mission. You just kept moving. He walked toward the armory. "Okay, now that we've watched a Spartan drive Darth Vader off his own ship with an EMP and a physics problem, I need 2 things from you. First, which moment got you? The Cortana refusal? The 47 minutes of names? Drop it below. Second, who do you want dropped into a galaxy far, far away? Next the Arbiter, Blue Team? An ODST squad with nothing to lose and everything to prove? Those comments decide what gets made. If this story hit the way it was supposed to hit, like, subscribe, you know where the bell is.